How's everybody doing this today? I'm so used to it being evening and I'm singing into this thing that this is a new experience, so bear with me. Want to say thank you to ASAP, this fine organization. I can't imagine, getting to do this. This is the first time getting to work with them. My name is Nick Ramey. I am an Iraq veteran. I did serve. I was an Army broadcast journalist. If you can't tell, I like to talk. So today's story, I want to give a quick shout out. My friends and family, well, family literally, is here, and this is part of my Mother's Day gift to my mom. She's partially inspired this, so let's give moms a hand. All the moms in the house, you definitely get one. So a lot of people told stories about childhood, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to follow suit. I grew up over on the Indianapolis' east side, right outside of Fort Benjamin Harrison, so I've seen Army green since I could possibly remember. The neighborhood I grew up in had a lot of not veterans, but service members. They would live off base and they would live in that neighborhood. I grew up in a very interesting environment. I had an educator for a mother and a journalist for a father, both of them graduating from Kent State during the 70s. So if that gives you any perspective on my upbringing, that is who you see before you now. I was very attuned to news and politics and information and what was going on. And I didn't have a whole lot of restrictions, especially when it came to libraries and PBS. So I was a PBS kid. I knew it all. One of my favorite shows, it was about 88 or 89, 1900s for my kids up there. It was a fun time because, public television was really the only thing on. We were not very rich, so we sure as heck weren't going to be paying for cable. And the PBS shows were a lot of fun, Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. One of my favorite ones about that time was a show called Shining Time Station. Now, if anybody remembers that show, it was a show that was kind of like a preemptive strike from Britain that brought Thomas the Tank Engine into our vernacular. So I enjoyed it because there was this funny little group of people that ran a little train station, and they would cut to episodes of Thomas the Tank Engine. And one of my favorite characters was Mr. Conductor. He was this little conductor guy that would walk through and kind of narrate what was going on in the stories and give a little bit of context to the world between both the American version and the British version. So in the first season, it was Mr. Conductor was Ringo Starr. Now, if you know who Ringo Starr is, he was the drummer for the Beatles. Now, season 2, it was a very interesting change, and I didn't recognize the guy, but my mom recognized him as George Carlin. All right, so George Carlin had a great career, and this was his period of time where he did some, educational stuff, and it was awesome. I really liked George Carlin's Mr. Conductor because he was really animated and he didn't have the British accent. He had the American accent, so I recognized it a little better and could identify with it better. Of course, I also recognized his voice from something that would pop up later on, but I didn't quite know what it was. So we did a lot of summer reading program things, my mom being a library sciences master's and pre-doctorate and going through all of her training. She ran IPS's media centers for many years. And through this process, I would go with her to the library all the time to study and research as she continued her credentials. And I was a free-range chicken in there. I had an unrestricted library card when all of the other little kids were like, well, I can only stay in the children's. Not me. I had this. So I would go and look at things, and I would be at the IPY library, and I'd be at all the libraries around the city. It was a lot of fun. And as a kid, and I'll never I get to tell my mom this today, the library was one of my favorite places on the planet. You could find anything in there, especially, music and culture and arts. And then you also got to see public and current events and a lot of those things. So I was very well in tune with what was going on in the world. I had heard and seen everything that was going on with, at that point in time, the problems in the Middle East and, all of the other things that were going on, especially locally. And then a couple of years later, so, of course, time passes. One of my favorite shows, this is great. And we continued to go to libraries throughout the years, and it was a lot of fun. And then by about 1992, we were in libraries, and I'm flipping through, and I recognize a face in one of my library treks. I like to get a lot of music, and that year, in '92, I had gotten my first little tape recorder and player. I love this thing, and I realized that now that libraries had cassette tapes in them, I could check out these tapes, and it would be whatever I want. I could hear everything on the radio, and I could bring it home. I get one day to just hang out at the library while Mom's studying, and I'm flipping through the stacks, and I'm getting my books, my little books from the summer reading programs and all that fun stuff. And I come across in the music area that there are comedy things. And I'm like, oh, well, I recognize some of this stuff. I've heard a couple of these people, through a bedroom door when somebody's studying, or through somebody on TV on late night or something. And I recognize a face, and it's George Carlin. And it was amazing. I was like, oh, Mr. Conductor, this is fantastic. I can absolutely listen to Mr. Conductor, and this is great. And in '92, I'm 10. So a 10-year-old gets his hands on George Carlin. So it's like I see the hippy dippy weatherman stuff, and my mom had told me about all of his early career stuff. And if you don't know much about George Carlin, there's a fantastic documentary on HBO that talks about his early career in radio and television. And he was a very clean-cut professional, it was very ready for TV kind of stuff. And in the process, he was making great transitions, and he turned into this kind of hippie, and he kind of was more socially aware and more positive. And then when I get to him, there was also a brand new cassette from George Carlin, and it's George Carlin Jammin' in New York. So I'm super excited that I get a brand new tape, and I get to take it home, and I get to have all this fun. So we go in, we check it out. I go home to my bedroom with my rumpled bed on one side, my cassette tape on my desk, and my cassette player ready to go, and I get my headphones on, and I'm like, I'm gonna listen to George first, why not? So I listen to his 70s era stuff, the Place for My Stuff, and things like that. Very calm by comparison. Listen to it, enjoy it, and then I pull out Jammin' in New York. Now, if you don't know about George's history, George at that point had made a significant turn into an anti-establishmentarianism point of view. He definitely was not happy with the things that were going on in the world, and he definitely wanted to say something about it. The big thing was, I didn't know this. So I went from Mr. Conductor to A Place for My Stuff and a cassette tape, and the hippy dippy weatherman to George Carlin's most angry rant at that time. So I am listening to the opening of George Carlin's Jammin' in New York, and the first thing that he's talking about is the Iraq War. At the time was Desert Storm, which in a strange way was very cathartic for me, because I had seen all of these kids going through their parents leaving, and you see the tragedy on the news, and you see the kids that are going through these terrible times in this foreign country that I'd never heard of before. And he was talking about it in a way that's this shouldn't be happening. We should be doing better. We should be doing much, much greater things with our power and our influence and energy. And of course, comparing missiles to penises on an album. I'm using the medical term, but it's definitely not in there that way. The album also showed me some things about the eloquence of the English language and the beauty that you can use all of these four-letter words and these huge concepts and these really racy prepositions to express yourself without sacrificing what you're trying to say. So I learned during that period of time how beautiful the English language was by an angry old man on a cassette tape. And then I realized that my library card was now a loaded weapon, which got me into Pryor and Eddie Murphy and all these other people that had these big grand ideas that got to say things that you wouldn't get to hear on TV all the time, that you wouldn't get to hear on the radio. They weren't necessarily always safe. So listening to all of these things and taking it all in, and then there was something else on that album that really stuck out to me. It was also what was called on the album the advertising lullaby, that took common things that I heard as a kid on all of these commercials and made a poem out of it. A beautiful poem that showed our excess and consumerism and all of these crazy things that I was just starting to understand as a preteen. You start getting a little bit of a perspective in the world about 10, 11 years old. So I had seen what my friends and neighbors were going through with military life, and I'd seen what people were going through with advertising and consumerism, and I saw what power could be had if you learned how to use the language as it was intended. And so I started this journey of learning how to use language. I became a writer, and I would do music, and I did lyrics, and then I started doing musicals and learning musical theater and learning all of these other things that kind of snowballed into this crazy life. And then by the time I get to about 19, I am tired of college. I am tired of school. I'm tired of being at home. I had a terrible apartment with a buddy. It wasn't going well, and I was like, I really want to change the world. So I joined the Army. Now, contrary to popular belief, that was a terrible idea, only because it wasn't something where you can change something that big. You can't change things like that from the inside. At least that's the way I found out. So through that process, I found out that George Carlin was in the military, and so was Jimi Hendrix, so was Muhammad Ali, so was Elvis Presley. Like, all of these people that were artists and musicians and performers had found a way to express themselves through the military, through that experience, and from that experience, and they grew. Even if they didn't stay in for a lifetime, they used it as a tool to springboard their voice and their art. And I decided to do it. I decided to use it for that. So in the process of me having absolutely carte blanche to run around a library, I learned how to use the English language to the point where I became an Army broadcast journalist. And then I was a musician, a touring musician for a while. And I still to this day feel that impression of this foul-mouthed little old man ranting and raving about how the world is supposed to work and how it isn't working, just to try to change it. And that's what I hope that I bring every day, is that I want to try to change the world in some small way using these cool words that I get to use every day. So, thank you.